All right, Joe, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. It's the first informational session we're going to have regarding the reorganization between Branciforte Fire and Scotts Valley Fire. We're going to have the Executive Director of LAFCO, Joe Serrano, and fire consultant Don Jarvis, who is working with LAFCO and Branciforte Fire. We're also going to have Larry Pagler, who's a member of the Resident Advisory Committee. And Joe, why don't you go right ahead and start us off here?
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, everyone. As Chief Lackey mentioned, this is an educational workshop meant to provide information about the proposed reorganization between Branciforte Fire and Scotts Valley Fire. And tonight, we'll go over three main topics. First, we will cover why this reorganization is happening and how do we get here. Next topic will be, how does this reorganization affect you as a resident? The third we will cover is, what is the community's involvement? In this case, there is a resident advisory committee, but what does that actually mean? And who's on this committee? And finally, and probably most importantly, we will then open the floor for comments and questions during the Q&A forum. This will be an opportunity for you to voice your concerns. But please note that this will not be the only time to learn and question the reorganization. The Branciforte board has been discussing the reorganization effort during each board meeting this year, and will continue to do the same during tomorrow's board meeting at 6 p.m. All residents are encouraged to attend those board meetings. There will also be an in-person workshop on October 1st at the Happy Valley Elementary School, which will once again be an opportunity for the community to learn about the reorganization. That being said, let's start with what the heck is going on. In order to understand the issues today, we need to look back. In this case, early 2015. This is when the grand jury highlighted significant operational and financial concerns about Branciforte Fire. The district budget was so limited that any unanticipated expense would put the district in a deficit. To put this in perspective, in 2014, total expenses for Branciforte Fire was approximately $730,000, and total revenue was approximately $733,000, leaving less than 0.5% left over in case of an unanticipated cost. What was worse is that between 2011 to 2015, the fire chief at that time was not being paid a salary just to balance the budget. That's 4 consecutive years. So the grand jury suggested 3 options. 1, consolidate with Scotts Valley Fire. 2, contract with Scotts Valley Fire and have them operate and manage the district. Or 3, continue the status quo until the district runs out of money. The Branciforte board decided to go with option number 2, and in September of that same year, entered into a contract with Scotts Valley Fire for operational services, meaning Scotts Valley Fire would provide a fire chief, admin staff, pay the bills, schedule shifts, in essence, assume all the operational responsibilities to help Branciforte Fire. However, this was meant to be temporary, around a year or so, to help Branciforte get back on its feet and improve. But the contract kept getting extended year after year. The contract ended up lasting 6 years before Scotts Valley Fire started to charge Branciforte Fire the true cost for all the operational services that they were providing, and Branciforte Fire determined that they couldn't afford the true cost. So in early 2021, Branciforte was informed that the contract will not be renewed and it will officially end on September 21st. On September 2021. Branciforte did not begin searching for a new fire chief until late July, early August, and by law, a district needs to have a fire chief to operate or it shuts down completely, including the fire station. Luckily, they were able to find a retired chief to serve part-time. And as some of you may know, CalPERS retirees can only work for a maximum of 960 hours per year. the equivalent of 40 days. So this hiring was merely a temporary solution. Now we enter September 2021. The contract between the two fire districts officially ended, and Branciforte Fire was on its own, with 3 full-time firefighters, no admin staff, and a part-time fire chief who is learning about Branciforte for the first time. The following month, LAFCO, which is a state agency that oversees the performance and boundaries of cities and special districts like Branciforte Fire, published a report that highlighted significant operational and financial issues, similar to the grand jury in 2015. And LAFCO requested that Branciforte Fire develop a long-term strategic plan to address the issues in the report and prove it can be sustainable on its own. The deadline to submit the plan was March of 2022, the same month that the part-time chief indicated that she was going to leave. Now we enter early March of 2022, with no plan scheduled to be submitted to LAFCO and the part-time chief set to depart on March 14th. This leaves the district on the verge of shutting down completely once again. As a reminder, no fire chief means the fire station and the entire district closes. I will note that between January to March, the part-time fire chief did conduct a nationwide recruitment search to replace her position. And in the end, the district received 0 applications. One of the reasons for the lack of interest was because there's no money to pay a full-time salary. The same financial issue in 2015 is happening again. In 2021, Branciforte Fire's total expenses was approximately $1 million. And total revenue received was approximately $1 million. So that's why 3 firefighters, no admin staff, and no full-time fire chief is what Branciforte Fire can afford right now. You may be wondering, well, what about the 3 firefighters on payroll? Can't one of them step into the fire chief role? The district did ask one that was qualified, and they said no. It wasn't until LAFCO having to step in to help encourage the qualified firefighter to be the temporary chief, with the understanding that LAFCO staff would help with admin support at no cost. This collaboration was to simply avoid the complete shutdown of the district so that the residents don't get negatively affected by this internal mess, and we can finally discuss the concept of reorganizing with Scotts Valley Fire. That is why the Branciforte board, with a 5-0 vote, unanimously adopted a resolution to initiate the reorganization on March 14th. And since then, Branciforte Fire has been discussing the reorganization effort during their board meetings. In the last few months, they have also created 2 committees. One is a joint ad hoc committee with 2 board members and the fire chief from both districts to discuss the details of the reorganization. And the other is a resident committee to help the district better understand the community's concerns about the proposed merger. So what happens next? Now that the district has a temporary chief, has initiated the reorganization, has updated its policies and website, and has collected more information, it is now ready to host community workshops to educate the residents. Again, the district has been holding public board meetings to discuss this matter during the entire year, but in addition, has decided to also conduct workshops specifically for the community to talk about this directly with you. I will note that not all board actions have been unanimous, like the initiation vote back in March. While the approval of conducting these workshops only passed by a 3-2 vote earlier this month, the idea of hiring an outside consultant to produce a study to determine the cost to keep the Branciforte Fire Station open was denied by a 3-2 vote in July. If the board decides to reconsider on that study, then a mail-in election to determine the Branciforte Station remains open will be considered in early 2023. If not, then this mail-in election step will not occur and will be removed from the schedule. We will discuss the Branciforte Fire Station and the proposed study in more detail momentarily. But as we continue reviewing this tentative schedule, the reorganization may be ready for LAFCO action by April of next year. So a public notice is scheduled to be advertised in March, and a hearing will be conducting the following month. If the LAFCO board approves the reorganization, This will require two proceedings. One will be a 30-day reconsideration period that allows anyone to provide new information to perhaps overturn the approval. And second will be the protest period, which allows the Branciforte residents to submit petitions of opposition. The rule of thumb is this: if less than 25% of the Branciforte residents submit petitions of opposition, then the approval moves forward. If LAFCO receives more than 25%, but less than 50%, that triggers a special election. And if more than 50% of the Branciforte residents oppose the reorganization, it gets terminated completely. But assuming all the steps are successfully completed, then the reorganization is estimated to be finalized by August 2023. So that's an overview of how we got here and what are the next steps. You may have a lot of questions, and I'm glad you do. The purpose of this session, once again, is to answer your questions. In my 14 years in working with LAFCOs across the state, I have heard frequently asked questions about reorganizations, and I want to address some of them right now. First, some of you may be wondering, what's wrong with the status quo? Well, for one, Branciforte is extremely understaffed. It has 3 full-time firefighters, with one of them now being your temporary fire chief. To put this in perspective, a fire chief is like a CEO. It's uncommon to see a CEO manage operations while also being the department, the HR department, the finance department, IT support, the custodian, and administration all by themselves without a full team. On top of that, they still are on call to serve the 600 plus residents by themselves during their shift for real-time emergencies like fire and medical calls. Another way of seeing it is the average amount of full-time employees for Santa Cruz County fire districts is 16. Branciforte has 3. The average amount of volunteers for Santa Cruz County fire districts is 22. Branciforte has 9, and none of them live in Branciforte. The average amount of firefighters on duty on any fire station is 3. Branciforte has 1, and they don't have paramedic skills. The next question I hear is, will the services get worse if we are part of Scotts Valley Fire? The answer is no. By law, any boundary change, like a reorganization, must maintain or improve service delivery. In this case, Scotts Valley Fire has 2 fire stations near Branciforte. Station 1 has 3 firefighters on duty 24/7, who are also paramedics. And Station 2 has 5 firefighters on duty 24/7, with 3 of them being paramedics. In total, Scotts Valley Fire has 29 employees. 28 of them are full-time staff, and of those, 21 of them are paramedic firefighters. Next question is typically, what is this going to cost me? Or are my property taxes going to go up because of this? The answer is no. There is no additional cost to the residents, and your property taxes will remain the same. However, because the Branciforte Fire Station has been historically and continues to be severely understaffed and underfunded, the residents will need to consider paying a new benefit assessment if they want to keep the fire station open with a minimum of 2 firefighters on duty. That's the minimum standard for the state and for Scotts Valley Fire. I will note that Scotts Valley Fire has made it clear that it can provide services to the Branciforte community with or without the Branciforte Fire Station. And keeping it open needs to be determined by the Branciforte community, not Scotts Valley Fire, before the reorganization is finalized. Some of you may heard that it will cost you $1,700 a year if you merge with Scotts Valley Fire. That is incorrect. There is no cost to merge with Scotts Valley Fire. That number is not based on any formal data or study. In fact, as of right now, the Branciforte board has decided not to conduct a study at all to determine the cost to keep the fire station open. And without a study by an unbiased third party, there will be no mail-in ballot or vote by the residents regarding the fire station, as I mentioned in the tentative schedule. Another question that I've been hearing lately is, why does Scotts Valley Fire want to take us over? The answer is they don't. They are functioning well on their own. They are financially sound, and they don't need to merge with Branciforte Fire. That's not the case for Branciforte Fire. The reason this reorganization is happening is because the collaboration between Branciforte, Scotts Valley, and LAFCO was the only way to keep the lights on for Branciforte Fire and prevent it from completely shutting down. And finally, what if we don't merge with Scotts Valley Fire? Unfortunately, the answer is not good. The district is currently holding on by a thread staff-wise and financially. It is estimated that the district will run out of money within a year or so. If that occurs, then the district will shut down, as well as the fire station. The firefighters lose their jobs, and there won't be a cohesive process like what we have right now because the district won't be around to be at the table to determine how fire and medical services will be delivered to the Branciforte community. And that's the reality we are facing. This isn't being rushed, as you saw in the timeline. It's going to take at least a year to complete, but there is real urgency because Branciforte Fire will probably survive on its own for another year. Now, let me be clear. LAFCO is not here to scare you or to blame anyone. LAFCO is here to inform you on what is happening and how we can address these issues together. Together meaning the affected agencies, but more importantly, you as a community. You as a resident need to be well informed and need to know what is really going on. With that being said, I think this is a good point to shift to Don Jarvis. I think it's beneficial to hear from him now, who is a former fire chief and was instrumental in the successful fire consolidation between Central and Aptos La Selva fire protection districts back in 2021, which involved 90,000 residents. Mr. Don will go over services offered by Branciforte Fire and Scotts Valley Fire in more detail, and will give a better insight about the Branciforte Fire Station and the proposed study/benefit election process. Mr. Don, with that, the virtual floor is yours. But before I give you the baton, I will note that if anyone has questions, what we'll do is we'll refer to the questions at the end. That way we can hear all the information first, and hopefully we may answer your questions, but at the end we'll have the Q&A forum. But I appreciate your time, and Mr. Don, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone, and I thank you for attending. I know everyone has busy lives, and we've all probably got other things we should be doing right now. But so what I'd like to do tonight is talk about, as Joe said, the current state of affairs at the Branciforte Fire District, where we're headed with this reorganization, and then what you can do, what choice you have as residents of the Branciforte community. Okay, so currently, as Joe said, the Branciforte Fire District has 3 full-time permanent employees. One of those, Nate Lackey here, is serving as the interim fire chief, while also working one of the 3 shifts. The district is also currently employing 4 temporary employees. 3 of those are firefighters, and 1 is an admin assistant. The district has approximately 9 active volunteers right now, and they run about 120 calls a year. That's 1 call every 3rd day. The operational model that the Branciforte Fire District uses is what they term a hybrid. So the idea is that they have a full-time permanent captain on each shift, and then the rest of that crew, for a minimum of 2 people, is filled out by volunteers. So it was always the plan to have 2 people in the station at least, 1 permanent captain to provide continuity for supervision and training, and then a volunteer firefighter filling in at least 1 other position. And that worked great for a long time. I think a couple of decades. Joe mentioned the 2015 grand jury report, and that report documented Branciforte with over 40 volunteers. So fast forward from 40 volunteers who were able to fill shifts 24/7 for 365 days a year to now 9 volunteers, and you can see that isn't going to work. So that's the reason why they added these 3 temporary firefighters to guarantee 2 people on duty in the station on every shift. What's currently happening is that because of the lack of volunteers and the need to hire temporary firefighters to fill the shifts, expenses are now far exceeding revenues. So for the current fiscal year that we're in right now, and the district is set to formally adopt this budget at tomorrow night's meeting. And as Joe said, we encourage everyone to attend that meeting. So Measure T, that's the special tax that you all voted on and passed in 2016, I believe. Measure T revenue is $166,000 this year. Expenses are set at $700,000. That's because the district is in dire need of replacing one of its fire engines. General fund revenue is $913,000. That's predominantly your property taxes that you pay. Expenses out of that general fund are projected at $1.4 million. So the district is drawing on their reserves, and at this burn rate, we anticipate that the district will be insolvent in less than 2 years and unable to continue operations, unable to pay its bills. Okay, Joe. All right, so here's the hard truth for the Branciforte community, and you know, it's sad because as we all know, the world has changed. We used to have lots of volunteers, and people aren't interested in volunteering anymore. So there are not enough volunteers available to staff the fire station. There's not enough money to pay people to staff the fire station. So what that equals is, if nothing is done, the Branciforte Fire District will have to shut down operations in less than 2 years. And that is why this reorganization has been put on the table, and we're moving forward with it. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the Scotts Valley Fire District. As Joe said, so the reorganization involves the dissolution of the Branciforte Fire District, and then the concurrent annexation of that territory into the Scotts Valley Fire District. So in essence, Branciforte Fire District is replaced by Scotts Valley Fire District. Again, Scotts Valley Fire District operates 2 fire stations, one in Glenwood and one at Erba Lane, each one staffed with a minimum of 3 firefighter paramedics every day of every week of every, 24/7. They have auto aid agreements in place. So automatically the closest unit responds to any emergency incident. Sometimes it's Santa Cruz Station 2, sometimes it's Central Fire District Station 2, or even Central Fire District Station 3, depending on the location of the incident. Scotts Valley is operating with a very thin management staff. So they're doing a lot with not a lot. They have no extra money. They're fully allocated, and as I said, they're doing a great job with really limited resources. They're providing industry standard level of service. That is 3-person engine companies, paramedics on the engine, battalion chiefs on duty to supervise. They've got, they're sound financially, they've got a functioning board of directors. So it's a very credible organization. And they can serve the Branciforte community from their existing fire stations with the same level and scope of services that they're providing to the rest of the Scotts Valley Fire District. Scotts Valley Fire has agreed to hire the 3 full-time permanent Branciforte employees into their system, and they've also agreed to bring on the Branciforte volunteers if they want to become part of Branciforte's program. The operational plan after reorganization is that Glenwood Station off of Granite Creek Road there would be the primary responder to most of Branciforte's territory. So they're planning to increase the staffing at that station to a minimum of 4 firefighters per shift, 3 of which will be paramedics. And that crew will use 2 pieces of apparatus. So they'll use a standard type 1 fire engine, which is the typical fire engine that you see in most communities around Santa Cruz County. And then in addition to that, they will use a new type of apparatus to them. They don't currently have one, and that's a Type 6 engine. So a Type 6 engine is a much smaller vehicle, more nimble, more maneuverable, a little bit better suited to the type of topography and road system that we find in the Branciforte community. So there'll be 2 firefighters on the Type 1 and then 2 on the Type 6. So they'll be able to split that crew and respond a little bit more efficiently to calls in the newly annexed territory. As I said, because of the auto aid agreements that are already in place, the responses to addresses in Branciforte would be from the closest fire station, primarily again Glenwood, but then also Herba Lane station down off of Mount Herman Road at the lower end. Santa Cruz Station 2 will come up from the bottom, and then Central Station 2 or Station 3 on the other side off Laurel Glen and Rodale Gulch. So now about governance. So people always want to know that one of the questions is who's going to be in charge. So the Scotts Valley Fire District has a 5-member board of directors that's elected at large. Exactly the same type of board of directors that the Branciforte Fire District has. Because the Branciforte community will be part of the Scotts Valley Fire Protection District after reorganization, any Branciforte community member who's a registered voter will be eligible to run for a seat on the Scotts Valley Board of Directors. Elections happen every other year in even years. So if this reorganization is finalized in 2023, like we're anticipating, then in the November 2024 general election, any Scotts Valley resident, or I'm sorry, any Branciforte resident would be eligible to run for a seat on the Scotts Valley Fire Protection District Board of Directors. So there would be either 2 or 3 seats open that alternates in successive election seasons. In addition to that, Scotts Valley Fire District has agreed to establish a formal advisory commission made up of Branciforte residents. And this is to provide accountability for the Measure T funds. So Measure T would continue to be collected in the Branciforte Fire District territory and would be used for projects and services that directly benefit the Branciforte community. So the advisory commission would be a way for an organized input into the Scotts Valley Fire District's budget and policies related to the use of those Measure T funds. Scotts Valley has said that they would have a standing item on every one of their monthly board agendas for presentations or questions from this advisory commission. All right, so another big question that's been floating around is what happens to the Branciforte Fire Station after the reorganization? Okay, so Joe's already let the cat out of the bag that there's not enough money to fund that fire station. So it's not going to be staffed unless the Branciforte community can come up with additional funding to pay for the firefighters to staff it. So this is because Scotts Valley Fire District does not need the Branciforte Fire Station to serve their current district. So the Branciforte Fire Station could close, could stop operating, and Scotts Valley would be fine. They're doing fine without Branciforte. They don't need them in order to serve the Scotts Valley community. On the flip side of that, Scotts Valley can provide adequate service to the Branciforte community from the existing Scotts Valley fire stations. So they don't need the Branciforte Fire Station in order to adequately serve the Branciforte community. Now, having said that, Branciforte Fire, Scotts Valley Fire, and LAFCO all agree that having the Branciforte Fire Station staffed with at least 2 firefighter paramedics every day would provide a superior level of service. So obviously, having a fire station in your neighborhood is better than having a fire station across town. It provides a superior level of service, but that comes at a cost. So funding to keep the station open isn't adequate from Branciforte, obviously. And Scotts Valley doesn't have any extra money to contribute to keeping that station open. So with the current level of funding, this Branciforte fire station cannot be staffed. Okay, that doesn't mean it won't be used. It just can't be staffed. But having a fire station or a building with fire engines in it, with the lights on, that's not a fire station unless there are some firefighters there to take those fire engines to the call. So if you're thinking that having the station closed means that the shingles are falling off the roof and the paint's peeling and the windows are boarded up, that's not what's going to happen. Scotts Valley will find a use for that facility, but it won't be a staffed fire station because it's the staffing that costs a lot of money. Okay, so if the Branciforte community wants a staffed fire station, they're going to have to come up with the funding. And here's how that happens. Again, so this is a very complicated process known as a benefit assessment. Now, to start with, only the Branciforte Fire Protection District Board of Directors has the authority to initiate this process. So far, they have declined to do so. They've taken 2 votes in 2 successive meetings. The first vote was a split vote, 2-2, because one of the board members was absent. So they took another shot at it in a subsequent board meeting, and it failed 3-2. So what they've actually been voting on is a $50,000 allocation to have an engineer's report done. And this is in compliance with Proposition 218, which was passed by the voters of California, which requires this type of thing. So the engineer's report would evaluate each of the more than 700 parcels in the Branciforte Fire District to evaluate it for the benefit it receives from having a staffed fire engine in proximity to it. Because that's what we're talking about, right? Staffing a fire engine in closer proximity to these parcels. So what is the benefit to a parcel? And what we're talking about here is benefit to a parcel, not to people. So this isn't about medical emergencies. It's not about rescues. It's not about auto accidents, although those firefighters will respond to that. What this benefit measures is the protection against destruction of that property by fire. So the assessment on a parcel is proportional to the benefit received. So I'll use an example. If you have a parcel with a barn on it that you could replace for $50,000, say, that's $50,000. And again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm maybe using the wrong terminology, but that's $50,000 in potential benefit that you get by having a fire engine there to keep your barn from burning down. If you have a house that would cost $500,000 to rebuild if it burns down from fire, obviously you stand to gain much more benefit from having a fire engine there to keep your $500,000 house from burning down than you do from your $5,000 barn. So the assessment would be based on the benefit, and then the ballots, which are mail-in ballots, only the parcel owners vote. And so each parcel owner would vote on each of their parcels, and they cast a yes or no vote. They would know at the time how much the assessment is going to be, because every parcel will have a unique assessment based on the benefit to that parcel. And the parcels are weighted again by the benefit, which translates directly into the assessment. And if more than half of the weighted ballots cast are yes, then the assessment passes. And obviously the inverse is true. Now, there's been talk also about discounts for senior citizens or people on fixed income or particular properties or buildings. And Proposition 218 does not allow for discounts because it requires that proportionality. However, the board of directors can choose to rebate an assessment from a different source of revenue. So basically, the board could decide, for people on fixed incomes or seniors, we'll rebate them out of the property tax revenue stream, and essentially it'll be a zero net charge. Okay, so we do not know how much the benefit assessment is going to cost each parcel, because that's determined on a parcel by parcel basis by this engineering report. So I can't tell you that the assessment is going to be $100 or $2,000. So any number that you hear thrown out, there's no basis for it. I could throw out a number and it wouldn't have any more legitimacy than any of the other numbers. We won't know what the benefit assessment is on any parcel until after the engineer's report. It's important to note that if the Branciforte Fire District Board authorizes this engineer's report, they will get a preliminary report that they will have to decide whether to place the assessment on the ballot after that preliminary engineer's report is in their hands. So the board of directors will know how much the assessments are going to be before they place it on the ballot. And they can decide at that hearing not to put it on the ballot. After they've spent the money and they've seen the engineer's report and they know what the assessments are going to be, they can decide to put it on the ballot or to not put it on the ballot. Also, as I said, any parcel owner will know before they vote how much their assessment is going to be. They'll be voting on their parcel and their assessment amount. Okay, I think that's about all I have to say. I'm going to turn it over now to Larry Pegler from the Resident Advisory Committee.
All right, well, thank you, Dawn. Good evening, my name is Larry Pegler. I'm a 25-year resident of Granite Creek, where I live with my wife and Katie, and we've raised our twin sons, Aaron and Jed, here, and continue to have a long-standing involvement with the Happy Valley Elementary School. We're among the 13 members of the Residential Advisory Committee. You can see the roster here on the screen. We're going to leave that up. I don't have the great slides that Dawn did. I'm just going to talk briefly before we go into questions. But I want to note that our 13 members were appointed in May of this year. The group spans both the geography of the Branciforte Fire District and ages from 24 years old to 73 years old, including several retirees on fixed incomes. Our most recent additions are Tony Sloss and Interim Fire Chief Nate Lackey, along with Don Jarvis and Joe Serrano, who've been working with us for LAFCO. The other 9 RAC members first convened a year ago in September of 2021 as an ad hoc group of community members concerned with the future of the fire protection in the Branciforte area. From the outset, our objective has been to gather and represent the concerns of residents as the fire district evolves into this new era. Our group has met 11 times over the past year, and many of us have attended each of the fire district board of directors meetings each month, including a presentation from our group at the December 21 board meeting. What I'd like to do is underscore some of the critical issues we've heard repeatedly from the community over the past year, several of which Don noted in his presentation. So I'll start with a few of those. Right at the top was a concern that the fire district's staffing levels were too low to assure safe and effective emergency response by a minimum of 2 firefighters on an engine. That was followed by a concern that we lack paramedics, which limits the scope of immediate medical response the Branciforte team can provide. This became a primary concern when we learned that medical emergencies account for 25% of Branciforte's service calls over the past 5 years. And one of the most welcome service improvements we expect to gain through consolidation with Scotts Valley would be those paramedic firefighters. That same service call data also showed that fire emergencies account for only 9% of Branciforte's service calls, which, while a small share of the total, generate tremendous wildfire concerns with the community. I think all of you have heard that or certainly share that. At our earliest meetings back last fall, we learned that many community members had their property insurance policies non-renewed, which is another term for canceled, when the one-year moratorium on insurance cancellations expired August 17th of 2021 on the first anniversary of the CZU Lightning Complex fires. This prompted us to learn more about the numerous factors considered when insurance companies cancel policies. And one of those includes the proximity to an active fire station for your parcel. This concern, combined with a long-standing appreciation of the Branciforte Fire Station as the de facto community center for Happy Valley area, prompted many residents to express their support for keeping the station open. Our group discussed surveying residents to gauge their overall interest in sustaining the station, but believed their responses had to consider the potential cost of any new tax to support that. Several RAC members with budgeting experience in public agencies attempted to estimate how much a new parcel tax might be that would be necessary to sustain the station. But we quickly realized, as Dawn just outlined, Proposition 218 requires a far more sophisticated analysis than we initially anticipated. That was the engineering study noted in Dawn's slides. So at this time, the RAC supports development of a benefit assessment study to determine the cost to keep the Branciforte Fire Station open, so that residents can have the opportunity to vote on the proposed benefit measure. This accurate and transparent analysis is critical to informing the community of the costs we would pay to keep the station open. In short, we've heard the community's interest in keeping the Branciforte station open. We just think the folks need to know what it will cost them. And with that, I'll note that the RAC will be involved with the community workshops Joe outlined for next steps, beginning with the first in-person workshop scheduled for Saturday, October 1st at the Happy Valley School. And with that, I'll turn it back to Joe and hope we can go into the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Larry. I'll actually, before we go to Q&A forum, I want to pass the baton to Chief Lackey if he wants to say a few words before we open the floor for Q&A.
Yeah, I would like to say a few words. Going back to the staffing, I've been at Branciforte as a volunteer, starting out for a couple years, and a total of 24 years here. And at the beginning, we had a number of volunteers, and the captains that were on shift still ran some calls by themselves. In the last 5 to 8 years, the amount of calls that your full-time career captains have been running by themselves are almost 120 a year. It's very rare that up until we staffed with the temporary firefighters, we had 2 firefighters on the scene to a call. And I just want to, let the residents understand it, how stressful that is, not only running a medical or an emergency call by yourself, but, running at 2 o'clock in the morning on a rainy night down a long, dark driveway with nobody there to help you turn around or back out. So I just really encourage people to kind of think about that when they're deciding how they want to move forward. So, and after that, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. We're going to give speakers 2 minutes to speak. You'll raise your hand, and Mr. Joe Serrano will allow you to speak when you're asked. If you're on your phone, you can press *9, and that'll join the conference call. once everybody has at least one chance to speak, then if we still have time, we'll let people ask another question. So with that, Joe, let's go ahead and go with the questions.
I will ask people who want to speak to raise their hand. I see Michelle Forbes, you have your actual hand raised. So I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Oh, 1 second, you're still muted. Give me 1 second, Miss Michelle. You should see a prompt. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, I have several concerns. My main concern, of course, was the insurance. And after these last fires, half of our neighbors got canceled. We have State Farm, which is one of the few, insurance companies that's still in here. Instead of wasting $50,000 on a study or something like that, why can't you just figure out how much you need? Because to keep the insurance, we have to keep that fire station open. Why can't you just figure out how much you need and divide it by 700? I mean, and then put that on the ballot. I mean, you pay for schools whether you have kids or not. Why do you have to assess it according to buildings? That seems ridiculous. Ridiculous waste of money. Can you understand the question?
Yes, ma'am. And is that your complete question? Because then we'll
Well,
answer.
it's mainly about the wasting the 50,000, because I got that thing. I mean, the bottom line is as far as we're concerned up here, and we're just behind De La Viega in the hills up there. As far as we're concerned, we need that fire station open, because people are, and everybody may lose all their insurance. I mean, there's a State Farm office in town. I don't know if you guys have talked to them about if they're going to, take us all off if you close that fire station. But that's certainly an issue, and we need an answer to that. But most of all, we would like to keep Branciforte, and we like to pay for it, but pay for it fairly and evenly.
Right.
And I don't see why wasting $50,000 for some report when you could just assess 700 equally. That's all I'm saying. Is there a
Understood.
reason we can't do that?
And I'll defer. Dawn, do you want to answer her question about why we have to do this study and not just figure out a number and charge people?
Well, yeah, and I appreciate the question, because as I said, this benefit assessment is a complicated process. But we don't have any choice but to follow the law. And the voters passed Proposition 218 in the early 90s, and Proposition 218 requires this study. So it's really not an option to just take a number, divide it by 700 and send out bills. That's not allowable under the law. We have to follow the law. And an engineer, it's they charge it. If you want to do the process, you have to pay the engineer. And yeah, that's just the way it works.
And I will note that in addition to Don saying that, we have to do this study, the fire chief sent out a request for a proposal to over 50 different consulting firms. And they only got one bid. And their bid was $50,000 to do this study. So because the law requires the study to happen and you only have one bid, that's where we're getting that $50,000 cost. And one of the concerns that the board talked about in July when they voted against the study was, one of the concerns was it's a lot of money for a study to figure out how much it's going to cost. But because the law requires it, that's the only way for you to figure out what the true cost is. And that's the only way to have a mail-in election. And that's the only way for the residents to vote on it. There's a statutory process, and unfortunately, that's the process. With that, I'm going to move on to the next speaker I saw with the hand raised. Brad, you've been asked to be unmuted.
That could be me. This is Paul Bradshaw.
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
So one item was a discrepancy in the expenses I saw in one where we were paying approximately $1 million a year in expenses. And then another one where it was 700 expense of Measure T plus 1.4 million. So that comes to 2.1. So what are our real expenses that we're incurring, and what are the expected expenses if we were to proceed forward to have a fully staffed station?
Thank you. And I will note that if you want to see the audited financial performance of Branciforte Fire, LAFCO did a report that looked at the last 5 to 6 fiscal years. So you'll see all the total revenues and expenditures in that LAFCO report, which is, I believe, Chief Lackey, that report is now available on the Branciforte website. But Chief, you're presenting a final budget at tomorrow's board meeting. Do you want to just let the audience know what the total revenue and total expenses are for this upcoming fiscal year?
Yeah, and I think we need to kind of explain the Measure T and the general fund as well. The general fund is used for the day-to-day operations, and that is the one that is the $1.4 million with the 991,000 income, or what we're going to receive from property taxes. The Measure T is the fund that was voted on, and we collect $166,000 a year, and that's set aside for equipment and maintenance on the facilities and repairs on the facilities, and it cannot be used for salaries and benefits. The reason there is the $700,000 in there now is we're looking at having to replace an engine, and that is the cost of replacing engines these days. So we have been saving up with that Measure T fund, but it's there to replace equipment that we can't replace out of our general fund. I hope that answers the question.
Next, we'll go with Terry K. You've been asked to be unmuted. Terry K.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I have attended most of the board meeting since over a year ago. And there was one, at least, that it was discussed quite a bit about the distance that a residence has to be to a fire station is regarding insurance rates, or if it's canceled. And but I never heard any. Was it ever looked into? Is there a specific number of miles that one has to be from the closest fire station? I don't know if each insurance company is different. Was there anything ever solid decided on that or found out on that?
Really good question, and I'll defer to the group, but it's my understanding that fire insurance companies are not just looking at the distance of fire stations to a property. And before, it used to be that they would rely on an ISO rating, but now they're looking at Google Maps and seeing, okay, this house is surrounded by trees, so it's a fire hazard, and they're starting to cancel insurance companies regardless if they're close to a fire station. But with that being said, Dom, is that accurate?
Well, yeah, it's a complicated issue because fire insurance companies, they're obviously in business to make money. And so what they're looking at is risk, right? So if they find that there's too much risk, they're going to cancel a policy. And as Joe said, they used to rely heavily on things like the ISO ratings and distance to a fire station. And now they're looking at their exposure, and they're canceling long-standing customers left and right. So you could be, in fact, I've heard stories of people next door to a fire station with a fire hydrant in their front yard being canceled. So many insurance companies will look at, say, a 5-mile travel distance from a fire station and take that into account. And if you're beyond 5 miles from a fire station, they will probably consider that a pretty significant risk. And if that's the case and no insurer wants to insure you because you're more than 5 miles from a fire station, then you get placed in the California FAIR plan at the way things are set up today. So you can get insurance, it's just going to be more expensive if you're beyond 5 miles from the fire station. But again, they're canceling policies for people who live across the street from a fire station. So it's not a hard and fast rule.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask the number that's 831-685-2915 to unmute themselves.
Hello, this is Becky Steinbrunner. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for putting up the phone number access information on the website this afternoon. That helped me a lot. And to the topic just discussed, California Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Laura just introduced a rule to the Office of Administrative Law that is now before them for the next 30 days that will require insurance companies to recognize neighborhood efforts like Firewise communities, which the Branciforte community has, and to give you discounts on your insurance. And I'll say State Farm is not canceling in this area, and they are in fact writing new policies and really moving forward on this very idea of giving discounts. I want to thank you for having this informational meeting tonight. This is really good. I have a number of questions. I want to know why the Measure T issue could not be recrafted by the Branciforte Fire Board and put on the ballot so that it could include staffing and to include an increased rate built in with a built-in increase if needed be, and put that on the ballot rather than doing a benefit assessment procedure. It's very expensive. It's very complicated.
Yeah, 20 seconds left, Becky.
All right. Why is Branciforte Fire Station 2 not included in the LAFCO analysis, and why is it not being discussed? What will the AP Triton fire study that LAFCO has commissioned to be done that will benefit the entire county for fire department consolidations be helpful for the Branciforte? And does Scotts Valley roll whenever there's a call?
Your time's up, Becky.
Okay, but does Scotts Valley come anyway? If Branciforte goes, they come too, right? So that needs to be talked about.
Thank you, Ms. Becky. I heard the question about Measure T and Station 2. I do want to defer to the group about Station 2. There is a building that's is part of Branciforte Fire, but it's not a station. It doesn't have any staff people there. It's just a building with an apparatus parked there, but it's not a station. So that's why it's not considered a fire station, because there's no staff in the building. So the only staffed station is Station 1. That's the current one having one firefighter on duty. Is that correct, Chief Lackey and Don?
Yes, that's correct.
And as regarding Measure T, so the Branciforte community approved Measure T a few years ago, and it had specific language regarding what Measure T funds can be used. And it indicated for equipment, and only for equipment or expenses for the fire station. And that language is clear that it can't be used for general funds or for salaries or benefits. It specifically states that Measure T will only be used for expenses such as buying equipment or apparatuses. Is that correct, Chief Lackey?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so we're going to continue with Kate Hudson Webb. You've been asked to be unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I want to speak to that $50,000 study. My take on it is that, for instance, where I live on a piece of property that has 20 households plus probably another 20 rental units in whether not official or inside of the house. And these 20 households on 3 parcels. And I believe that, some method, and I think the study would cover this. Our property should be assessed per household, or per the structures that are here, because that would be more fair, I would think, to other people who have, say, just 1 home per parcel. And where we have a lot more, it just doesn't seem fair. Secondly, the obligation of the fire department per parcel is greater on R3, or actually R2, compared to 1 person that has 1 household on 1 parcel. So that's just my comment. I think the study would give a fair assessment of the actual safety needs, safety help that our citizens would need, and distribute, require, funding appropriately assessed. That's it.
Appreciate the comments. Chief Lackey or Don, did you have any comments regarding her question about households being assessed rather than the parcels? I think you mentioned that in your presentation, Don, but can you reiterate?
Yeah, again, what we have to do is conform to the requirements of Proposition 218 as it was written and passed by the voters of California. So the whole concept behind the benefit assessment is that parcels are assessed based on the benefit they receive from the service provided. So yes, to her point, a parcel with more households, more buildings, more value would receive a greater benefit than a parcel with fewer homes or fewer improvements and of lesser value. So yes, the intent of Proposition 218 is to assess properties fairly and proportionally based upon the benefit that they receive.
And as you mentioned that, I agree with you, Ms. Kate, that a benefit study would clearly identify that of how much it would be for the particular parcels. I did want to.
Mr. Ralph Bingham has a question he hasn't been able to
Oh, I'm sorry.
ask yet. So
Go right ahead.
My question has to do with that benefit study. For $50,000, is this company going to walk each parcel and count the structures? Because like the one lady said, they have some permitted and unpermitted, or are they just going to peruse the assessor's statement and go by what's reported on the tax rolls? Because I have neighbors that have unpermitted that when I pull up their parcel number, there is nothing but 1 single house. And for $50,000, it seems like it's pretty cheap if you're going to be actually counting the true number of structures and not just scrolling through a computer screen. I mean, how do they actually do this study? Physically walking and inspecting, or?
Okay, I'll try to jump in and answer. If have you completed your question?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, all right, yeah, thanks. So I think the general method that they use is to use the assessor data that's already collected, right? I mean, because in Branciforte, we're only talking about 700 parcels, but this same company does fire districts. They did the county of Santa Cruz CSA 48, which I think is over 20,000 parcels. So obviously they're not going to go walk every parcel. There is a provision that that they can do a, forget what they called it, like a special assessment of properties that don't fit neatly into categories. So I'll give you an example. When they did Santa Cruz County CSA 48, which is the funding mechanism for the county fire department, that includes the Lockheed facility up at the end of Empire Grade. So they actually did a special assessment for that Lockheed parcel and all of the particular things that happened there that was outside of what could be simply pulled from the assessor data. Also Monterey Bay Academy, which is a private school down off of San Andreas Road in the South County, they did the same thing there, along with the county facilities at the Buena Vista landfill and the Roundtree site near there. So there is provision for us, a closer look at particular properties. And I imagine what would happen is that the fire chief would give them a list of properties that don't fit the mold, and that they would look at those individually. I don't believe it would consist of a site walk, but it would attempt to in some way capture what's actually going on the parcel, whether it's permitted or not.
Great. I'm going to continue with people that haven't spoken yet. So I'm going to go with Miss Lori Broderick Burr. You've been asked to be unmuted.
Good evening. This is actually Jim Burr, and I have two questions tonight. The first is, of the 25% of the calls that are medical, how many of those, and you can answer anecdotally, maybe the chief could, how many of those are actually auto accidents? And the second question is, if we're going to vote to keep the station open, wouldn't we want to separate from Scotts Valley so that we have all of our funding, for that purpose? Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Chief, do you want to kind of take a stab at the 25%? How many are?
I would say maybe 2 to 3% would be auto accidents on that. So the majority of our calls are public services or medicals. So.
And in regards to the other question, hypothetically, if the district would to reconsider and hiring an outside consultant and do the analysis and determine the cost, and it goes through a mail-in ballot, and the residents approve the assessment, as part of the LAFCO reorganization resolution, which identifies terms and conditions, we can include language stating something to the extent of the approved assessment by the Branciforte community will remain within the Branciforte community. So that will ensure that the funding collected by Branciforte will stay in Branciforte. So that's something that LAFCO would include in the recorded resolution, assuming this whole process moves forward in regards to that benefit study.
Okay.
I'll now go to.
Wait, hold on. Can I add on to that, Joe?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so and I think I might have heard in the question there, why would we consolidate with Scotts Valley if we have a source of funding that we could just continue to run the Branciforte Fire District just with more money?
Oh, I see.
And the problem with that is that by the time you hire a full-time fire chief and have the 3 current captains and then 3 permanent firefighters, and an admin assistant, you're probably spending at least the same amount of money that you would be spending if it was Scotts Valley Fire, and you would not have a paramedic program because the County of Santa Cruz EMS agency oversees the emergency medical services system, and they would not allow a department of only 6 firefighters to operate a paramedic program because there's just not the depth there to ensure that you have paramedics available 24/7, 7 days a week. So even if you have the current 3 captains who are not paramedics, if you hired 3 full-time paramedics, that means those 3 people are again covering every shift, every day, every week of every year without a break. And if one of them quits and goes to work somewhere else, or one of them gets hurt and there's a vacancy, now you have only 2 of them trying to cover those shifts, and the EMS agency is not going to allow that. So it doesn't make any sense to spend extra money and then still not have a paramedic program.
I appreciate the clarification. I'll now move to Tony Sloss. You've been asked to be unmuted.
Great. You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. I have one comment and then a couple of questions. The $50,000 for the benefit assessment study, which apparently needs to happen to be in accordance with Prop 218 and the law. It does seem like a lot of money. It is. But when I divide it by 700, it comes out to spending about $70 per parcel for that work. And when I look at it that way, it just seems more reasonable, and because it takes time to put that info in on each parcel and double check it and so on. So even if they're doing it from a GIS information source, I can still imagine it taking that kind of time. My question is, the benefits assessment study seems to be the only way we can really know what it costs to keep the station open, and therefore to possibly vote to keep the station open. How can we let the board of directors, the Branciforte Board of Directors, know that we want that benefit assessment study? Because apparently they voted against conducting the study. If some people want to see that study happen, how can we let them know?
Thank you, Tony. That's a good question. So you're right. The board voted, denied hiring an outside consultant to do the study. And that's why the resident advisory committee recommended that a postcard with a survey be asked to the residents to see, does the community want to see a study? And that's one way of letting the board know if you receive the survey in the mail to either check yes or no. Again, it's not an official mail-in ballot. It's just a survey question asking, do you want to see a study to figure out what the cost is to keep the fire station open? Check yes or no. That survey is also available on Branciforte's website. And we are keeping track of, who's providing responses. That way that's, if you can only respond once, and we're going to filter out people that don't live in Branciforte, but that way we can kind of gauge of what the residents feel about this study. Another way, if you don't want to submit a study, another way is to attend the board meetings and voice directly to the board that you want to see a study. Now, legally, legal counsel mentioned this at the last board meeting, but in order for the board to reconsider hiring an outside consultant, one of the board members that voted against it would have to request to bring it back. And if that's the case, then the board can take action on hiring an outside consultant once again. But you're right, the board has denied hiring someone to do the study. But if they hear from, I think if the board hears from the residents that they want to see a study and they want to see what the true cost it is to keep the fire station open, I think the board would reconsider, but they have to hear it from the residents. So that I really appreciate that question. Now I'll ask Miss Marilyn to unmute herself.
Yes, I'm audible, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I really just want to follow up on Tony's comment is just to be crystal clear that the board has voted no at the current time for doing a study. They have voted not to spend $50,000 to get the cost information on what it would cost to keep Branciforte Station open and staffed safely. So that unless the board reconsiders, and one of those people, as you just said, one of the persons on the board who voted against it votes now or brings it up again to have the cost benefit study, cost benefit assessment as it's called. If that doesn't happen, the district members will not get to vote and the station will close. I just want to make sure that that's crystal clear. Either it gets brought up by someone who didn't vote for it before on the board, or it doesn't happen and the station will close. Thank you.
And yes, Don and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, if the board does not bring this back, their action stands, meaning that there's not going to be a study and there's not going to be a mail-in election, and the fire station will not be staffed because there's no study, there's no benefit assessment to keep it open. So that means the fire station will not be in operation. But as Don mentioned in his presentation, following the consolidation, the station will be used for something else, whether it's an inventory facility or a community center. Who knows what the alternative is? But as of right now, because of the actions by the board, it's not going to be staffed because there's no funding to keep it staffed post reorganization. So you're correct on that assessment. I'll now refer to Carol Witter. You've been asked to be unmuted.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to support the study and support the Branciforte Fire Department and appreciate all their hard work for trying to keep the station open. And from my understanding, it sounds like our best bet is to merge with Scotts Valley and also hope that once we get our assessment per property, then we vote to keep the station open. Is that okay? Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been working so hard on keeping this open, and we appreciate your work.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Are there any other questions from people who have not spoken? If not, then Chief Lackey, if you don't mind, we can open it up for people that spoken previously.
Yes, that's fine. We have about 10 more minutes. So
okay, so I'm going to ask Brad, I think it was Bradshaw, to unmute themselves.
Yes, hello again. Thank you. So one, does the Scotts Valley Fire Department commit to having a small 4-wheel drive fire truck able to traverse our roads up here as part of their commitment to this area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That would be a new unit for them. We anticipate that unit would be purchased through Measure T funds, and that's actually included in the proposed Branciforte Fire District budget for this year that we're currently in. So Branciforte would buy it, and then post reorganization, it would be housed at the Glenwood Station and staffed with the crew there.
Okay, thank you. And the follow-up question, I didn't hear if there was, the current budget is currently around $1 million. And is there an anticipated budget of what it would take to staff it appropriately? Is it 2 million, or what's the delta in cost? Do we have any rough estimate of that?
So this is very rough, okay? So if it's currently staffed with 1 person and we need to staff it with 2 people, double what's currently being spent.
Thank you, Brad, for your questions. I'll now ask Ms. Becky to be unmuted.
Thank you. This is Becky Steinbruner. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I asked a question about whether the AP Triton study that LAFCO has commissioned for consolidation of fire districts throughout the county, if that will include Branciforte, Scotts Valley consolidation. That didn't get answered. The other question I asked was, does Scotts Valley always roll when there's a call in Happy Valley, even though Branciforte rolls too? So they're coming with their paramedics as a backup. Those two questions did not get answered. I want to ask if, because I've looked at the consolidation of other districts, has LAFCO done a property tax exchange agreement that is required before LAFCO can consider any jurisdictional change? That's a California Revenue and Taxation Code 99B6. That has to be done. Has it been done? Has the plan for service in the affected area under Government Code 56653 been done? That also has to be done. Is LAFCO considering any CEQA determination for this? Because I think it will change the level of service for the people up in what is called the Station 2. You're not calling it a station, but it does provide service in times of need for people way up. Is there any CEQA determination for how their service would be affected if the station Branciforte closes? The other thing that I tried to express in my earlier comment was not was about Measure T. Was what
You
would
have 5
happen
seconds left, Becky.
if the community dissolved Measure T and rewrote something that expanded it.
Your time's up, Becky.
So Ms. Becky, really good questions. And I'll run through them, and Chief Lackey and Don, you can chime in afterwards. So as part of any application, any boundary change, whether it's annexation, consolidation, reorganization, state law requires LAFCO to deem the project complete. And there are several statutory requirements that need to be completed before LAFCO can say this application is ready for commission consideration. One of them is a CEQA requirement. So that's something that LAFCO has to complete before we deem this application complete. So that is on the to-do list. Also is this plan for service. You're right, by law, a plan for service is required before LAFCO can consider this application complete. One of the benefits of this joint ad hoc committee that has representatives from Branciforte, Scotts Valley, and LAFCO is that we're working on that plan for service collectively. Together, we are going to develop a plan for service that shows here's the current level of service from Branciforte. Here's the proposed services under Scotts Valley Fire if this reorganization is completed. So we're working on that together as we speak. When it comes to the property tax exchange agreement, again, you're right. That's another requirement that LAFCO requires for any application. And this is something that the County Board of Supervisors needs to adopt a property tax exchange agreement indicating how much of the property tax that are currently being connected from Branciforte Fire, how much of that is going to go to Scotts Valley Fire if there's reorganization is completed. That's on one of the to-do lists for the County Board of Supervisors on their upcoming agenda to determine that property tax exchange agreement. LAFCO is currently working with the county's Auditor Controller's Office, the County Assessor's Office, to determine those numbers in which the Board of Supervisors will then consider a resolution. So those 3 items that are statutorily required they have to be completed before LAFCO can deem it complete and schedule it for commission consideration. Now, when it comes to the AP Triton, for those who are not familiar, LAFCO hired an outside consultant to look at all the spheres of influence of special districts, specifically fire districts. And for those who are not familiar, spheres are planning tools. They indicate where a district could grow or provide services that are outside their current jurisdiction. As part of this contract that we hired AP Triton, they're going to look at all the spheres for the 8 or 9 fire agencies. One of them is Branciforte and Scotts Valley Fire. They have a sphere, but what's interesting regarding their sphere is that they share a combined sphere. The sphere for Scotts Valley Fire is the same as Branciforte Fire. This sphere was approved back in 1995. So since 1995, LAFCO has indicated Scotts Valley Fire and Branciforte, you should merge. And so that sphere, as well as the other spheres for the fire agencies, are being analyzed by AP Triton. And that report is barely in the preliminary stages, and we're hoping to get something by the end of the year, early 2023. And finally, you got a question about Scotts Valley Fire and mutual aid agreement and auto aid agreement. And yes, so when there's the beauty of fire districts is when there's an emergency, it's all hands on deck. It doesn't matter if you're Branciforte, Scotts Valley, Zianti. If you need help, firefighters have each other's back. And that's through mutual aid and auto aid. But it's the issue with Branciforte, it's not reciprocal because you only have one firefighter on duty. It's a liability for other fire agencies to accept help from one firefighter. So you're right that Scotts Valley Fire provides services in Branciforte, just like Central and the city of Santa Cruz, but it's not reciprocal. So that's one of the issues that's there. And I think that's all the questions.
Also,
Don?
I'd like to add to that real quick.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think Ms. Becky was asking if Scotts Valley Fire responds to every single one of our calls, and they do not at this time. They only respond to a few designated high priority calls. For example, vehicle accidents and certain high risk medicals. So and structure fires and wildland fires. So not every single call gets a Scotts Valley unit as of now.
Thank you for that clarification. I do see a new hand raised. Mark, you've been asked to be unmuted.
Yes, hi. I have a question about the benefit assessment study. If the board of directors reverses its decision and does decide to go ahead and approve the study being done and at a cost of $50,000, where does that funding come from? Will property owners receive some sort of assessment for this, or is there a fund already in place that could be drawn from to pay for this?
Good question. And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would come out from your general funds or your reserves to pay the 50,000?
That is correct, and we have already budgeted for that in this upcoming budget.
Great, thank you.
And I think we're getting close to time, so maybe a couple more questions.
All right, I see Adam Shore, you've been asked to be unmuted.
Hi, thank you. I was just curious, and I apologize if this was mentioned before, but what is the level of funding of the Measure T funds that are set aside currently?
Like the whole, we have $1 million, around $1 million in the Measure T fund now. We've budgeted $700,000 for equipment and repairs to the station this year.
So is that $1 million, that $1 million is before the $700,000, et cetera, that is going to be spent? Or I'm curious, I think that Becky had brought this up and I missed the response on it, as far as, is there a way that those funds could be reallocated or unlocked, or has there been any assessment as to whether the Measure T funding has been appropriate, since is it at the appropriate level? Are those funds, do they still need to remain designated, or can they be unlocked for general purposes?
I believe they have to stay what it was voted on to begin with. Joe Serrano or Don Jarvis might be able to explain that a little better.
Yeah, I will defer to Don, but I have not seen a situation where an existing measure, the language that was adopted by the affected community, be changed to be used for anything else. I think that is not allowed. The only thing, unless the language indicates that you could increase the Measure T funds, but again, it's what the residents have approved, what the language is. You can't just go back in there and change it because times have changed. I don't think that's allowed by law, but I'll defer to Don if he has any other corrections on that comment.
Well, you're pretty much right on. The only caveat is there is language in Measure T that was in the ballot that was voted on that talks about contingencies. So the three things were facilities, equipment, and then contingencies. So I guess the board gets to define what's a contingency, but again, they're ultimately answerable to the voters who passed that measure and to the property owners who are paying the $200 per year. So there's built-in accountability in that the board of directors is accountable to the citizenry. But again, the contingencies language probably leaves some wiggle room, but that's again between the board and the constituents of the district.
Yeah, and I would also defer to their legal counsel because you want to make sure that if the board does take that route, that they get clear direction from their legal counsel. That's that's something that the board can bring up at their future board meetings. Chief, I will note that it's 7:31. I do see. I think we have time for one more from Miss Marilyn, and then we have a closing remarks. So if you don't mind, I'll ask Miss Marilyn to unmute herself.
That would be great. Thank you.
Miss Marilyn.
Yes, I'd just like to do a very brief few thank yous. I hope that the district understands that although I've heard some discussions in other forums that LAFCO is forcing a reorganization, LAFCO has been wonderful in working with the board to offer help in a reorganization. The board has been wonderful in voting for that reorganization, and Chief Lackey has stepped up to be interim chief. And without those three things, I hope the public understands that we were hours, not days or weeks, from not being able to have a legally functioning fire station. So thank you for all those, and an additional, hope that people will support, and the board members who have voted against the study will reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Marilyn. And I do want to extend the appreciation to the Branciforte board and their three firefighters and Chief Lackey for really, stepping up to the plate and having these. It's a tough discussion. Change is hard, and LAFCO saw that there was a huge issue, and some LAFCOs are more reactive. We could have easily just kind of stepped aside and say, hey, that's your problem, you figure it out. But fortunately for Santa Cruz LAFCO and my commission, they're more proactive. I will note that we've been helping Branciforte since this came up to us since last year. We saw the red flags, and we've been providing assistance. As I mentioned, LAFCO staff, you're looking at 100% of LAFCO staff, and we're providing services to Branciforte free of charge. And I don't get paid overtime. This is my own personal time that I am giving to Branciforte Fire because I care about the fire protection and just the services to Branciforte. So I hope residents understand that LAFCO's not here to force this upon you. LAFCO's here to help. And I hope the residents get that. But I do want to just leave with the final note that if you want to receive notifications about upcoming meetings or workshops, please email b40firedistrict@gmail.com. It's on your screen. That way you can subscribe and join a free distribution list. It's run by your chief. So if you email it, we'll add you to a distribution list, and you'll be notified when there's upcoming workshops and meetings. And if you want more information, your temporary fire chief, even though he's new on the job, he has really cleaned house. He revamped the entire website. So if you need information about this reorganization, about past meetings, all that information is now available on the Brancifortefire.com website. With that, Chief, if you have any other comments, I think this was a good first workshop. This the first of many workshops. So I really appreciate everyone's participation.
Thank you all for coming and look forward to you in October 1st.
And there's a board meeting tomorrow night at 6 p.m. If anyone's interested, please join.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care. And this workshop was recorded. So the recording will be available on the Branciforte website as well once we upload it. So again, I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Joe. Thank you, Chief Lackey.
Thank you for everybody coming.
All right, I'm going to end this meeting. So have a good evening, everyone.